Hello YouTube, welcome to Track Dave. Last time we were in the A35 and we were talking about the next track day that was going to be at Donington Park. Well, obviously that got cancelled. We've rescheduled, rebooked, but we'll be going to Alton Park, and that won't be until something like the 26th of July. So that's quite far away. But in the meantime, my plans for next year have moved forward slightly. So it was always the plan to go circuit racing next year. But what I'd originally intended to do was go and drive someone else's car this year, once or twice, to decide if it was something that I wanted to do, and then over the winter go and find a car to buy to take racing, or build a car to take racing. Being sat at home with no track days on and bored and not a lot to do, I kind of got a little bit impatient, and I've ended up buying a car that I'm going to convert myself to racing spec and take that racing next year. So I started looking at cars that were already prepped and had won races, available on Race Cars Direct or stuff that was on eBay, Piston Heads, places like that. And it was kind of coming down to, you could get a relatively cheap front wheel drive car in the shape of a Clio or a Fiesta or a Mini, something like that, for not a huge amount of money. But if you wanted something rear wheel drive, it seemed to be a bit more expensive, with the cheapest kind of stuff tending to be MX5s, and if you wanted one that was a decent build in good condition, looking at sort of 8,000 to 10,000-12,000, depending on the cost of the various bits and pieces, suspension and stuff like that that's gone into it. So that was kind of the ballpark that I was looking at. So then I started pricing up building something myself, based on just having a look on Auto Trader, eBay, finding the cheapest MX5 that was available, and then having a look at the MX5 Super Cup Series regs and just listing all of the parts that are fitted to the cars there, pricing everything up, all the safety kit, the cage, extinguisher, harnesses, seats, things like that, and came to a total that was just a little bit over the cost of buying a pre-built car. And I liked the idea of building it myself, so I decided that it's worth spending a bit of extra money doing it myself to get the experience of doing it and learning the car, knowing where corners have been cut, how stuff works, rather than buying a car that's complete, not really knowing the electrics, and then if you have an issue, it might be a little bit trickier to try and problem solve. Whereas if you've done all the work yourself, you know where you've put particular wiring, you know what's hooked up to what, and so in some ways that it can be quite a bit easier. If you do have issues further down the line, it can be quicker to fix them. So I was in the fortunate position that my brother at the time was looking to sell his MX5. He just got another car, and his car was a bit ratty, courtesy of being parked in supermarket car parks all day. So there's a load of dings and dents in it, and there's some bits where some bits of lacquer peel and bits where the arches are starting to rust. And he knew that one of the sills would need welding because the last one was done last year, and it looked like this one would probably need to be done soon anyway. So I got that off him for a pretty good price, which meant that overall, I think with the purchase price of the car and all of the stuff that I'm going to have to put on it, not necessarily the most expensive stuff, but I didn't want to go for cheap crap, it's looking like the whole build will be somewhere around 10 grand, which does seem like a lot for a car that you're going to take racing. But so long as you don't completely bin it, it looks like cars built to that sort of spec seem to hold their value relatively well. So I think maybe after a season of racing or something, it might be worth 7 or 8, which doesn't seem too bad to me. So he dropped the car off a couple of weeks ago, and I started working on it straight away. I was going to film stuff, but I was just too eager to start spannering. So I've stripped as much stuff as I can out of it as possible. I've basically done all of the cheap, free and easy things, parts of the build, because I haven't got around to buying any of the expensive bits yet. So I've stripped it. I've taken something like 100 kilos out of it so far, just in plastic trim, the factory ROPS, the seats, seat belts, carpets. I've also stripped the wiring harnesses down and taken out all of the stuff that I'm not going to need, like radio wiring, central locking, traction control, stability control wiring, all the airbags, airbag wiring and everything like that. So it's actually quite a lot of weight that you can take out of these cars. And now it weighs something like 950 kilos with all that stuff out. So I think once the cage has gone in, that's going to put 50 kilos back into it. And then stuff like the seat and the harnesses, pretty much the only things I'm going to have to put back into the car. So I think if I can get a little bit of a power boost, I'll probably end up with the car being just over a ton, maybe 1,020, 25 kilos, something like that. So if I can get the power up from 160 to something like 185 with a better exhaust manifold and intake and a remap, then I should be pretty much dead on 180 horsepower per ton, which is the target for Class C of road sports in the 750mc, which is the category that I'm looking to race in, because I like the idea of endurance racing where you get a good amount of time in the car per race, per weekend, and 750mc is supposed to be a pretty friendly atmosphere, a good way into it, and certainly down in Class C people don't seem to be spending huge amounts of money. So long as you are quick enough, you can be relatively competitive without needing a huge wallet, which might be the case in the top classes or in some other series. So some of the other bits and pieces that I've done so far, like I say, I was focusing on the cheap and easy bits. So I've done the bonnet catches, which have to be fitted. I started off trying to buy some cheap knockoff versions of the Pit King quick releases, but they just didn't work. I couldn't get them to work with the angle of the bonnet, and even if they did, I don't feel confident that they would hold the bonnet sufficiently and they'd be easy enough to release if needed. So I went for the proper aero catches, which are quite a bit more expensive, but I think I feel a lot more comfortable using those on something like the bonnet, where you really don't want that flying up while you're racing. So fitted those. I've also done toe straps, and while I was doing that, I painted the bumpers again because they were looking a little bit manky. So drilled holes for the toe straps and primed and painted those again. I've done the main kill switch to cut the ignition and isolate the battery. And I plan on doing a guide for that because I found all sorts of conflicting information online about that. There didn't seem to be an easy guide or anything I could find on YouTube, actually, like an idiot's guide explaining where to connect what. So I sort of pieced that together from a few different websites, so I think that'd be useful to have a guide on how to do that. I've also wired up the Chimsel to be a rain light because I didn't fancy buying a rain light just for that purpose, and having a look at the MSA regs, actually the third brake light meets all of those requirements. So I've just got a little switch and a relay in there that when you flick the switch, it just powers up the chimsel on its own, and when you flick the switch off, it works as it would normally coming on with the brake lights. So that cost the sum total of about £5 in relay and wiring and switch and stuff like that, which is quite a lot better than 50 quid for a high intensity LED version. I've also mounted a tablet to the dash, thinking that I might try using this as a lap timer, certainly for, maybe not for racing, but for test days and things like that, so I can see how the lap times are going, see how things are improving, and I've done that just on a GoPro mount. So I've just screwed that straight into the dash, and then behind that I've mounted a USB port hardwired in, so I can send power to that. And also I've put another USB port in the back of the car, which is where the GoPros will be for when we're racing. So there's two ports there. So the plan to be to have one forward facing, one rear facing, so that can power those. The next steps really are to get the roll cage ordered, get that in, pick a seat. So that's kind of been on hold for the seat really, because I want to go to a place to try a few different seats to make sure that I get one that is really comfy and fits me perfectly, because doing sort of 45-minute races, and my plan is to drive 2 races as well, keep the car road legal. So I want a seat that I can spend a lot of time in without being uncomfortable, without getting a bad back, or without being too tight and ending up with strain on the knees or something like that. So it's important to go somewhere and try a seat out. So obviously currently everywhere that sells seats like that is closed, so you can't get in and test anything. So that's the next thing really. I'm looking at probably the Sparco Circuit 2, which I think will probably fit me, and I think will fit in the car, but I just want to check. And on paper it looks like one of the lightest seats for that sort of price and size. But there's a few other seats, stuff by Cobra, OMP, that I want to try as well, and just see if there's one that's a better fit or might fit in the car better, because it's a relatively narrow cockpit. It's not as bad as the early Mark 1 and 2 MX5s, but it's still pretty narrow, so getting a seat that will fit and have enough space for me to get my hand down the side to put the bolts in to mount it is going to be pretty important. And then getting the roll cage as well, need to get that ordered and bolted in, and then a harness, and then the car can pretty much be driven on the road. I can start driving around deciding what to do next. I've got a long list of all the bits that I'm going to get for it, so it definitely needs new bushes. It'll obviously need some coilovers and anti-roll bars, because at the moment it rides a bit like a boat, which is alright on a bumpy road, but it's not going to be great on a track with sticky tyres. I need another set of wheels to put the semi-slicks on, and the wheels that came with it are these rotor grids, which I'm going to use as wet weather wheels, so I'll just get some decent road tyres put on those to use for wet races and driving to and from races. And then it's other safety equipment, so I've got to get the extinguisher bought and plumbed in, and I want to run a hard top because I don't like the idea of getting rained on. I know the Super Cup guys all race without any roofs at all, but I think roof would be about 20 kilos, something like that. So if I can offset those 20 kilos with a little bit more horsepower, I'm willing to pay for that if it means I've got a roof that keeps me out of the direct sunlight and out of the rain on nasty days, or driving 3 hours to get to a race. So that's the plan anyway. And currently I'm planning on keeping the glass windows and electric motors and regs, because it'll obviously cost a bit of money to go to a polycarb window setup, and then I'll lose the versatility of being able to drop the windows. So I want to get the car built, get the roof and everything, get it weighed, work out what the power to weight is, and then decide if I need to go down the route of finding a couple of extra kilos here and there, because generally for daily use, getting two places, having a glass window that drops electrically would be ideal. So I don't want to pay the money to get rid of those and then find that I need to put ballast in the car because it's too light for the regs. So that's pretty much where we're up to now with the build. I'm hoping to try and make videos a bit more regularly. I will try to not rush and do stuff before I think about getting the camera out, so that people can see how stuff's done, and then hopefully I'll do a couple of talk throughs of the bits and pieces that I've done to the car already, so the kill switch and the toe straps and stuff like that, just to show how I did them, because finding information can be a little bit tricky. But until next time, enjoy yourselves and stay safe.